one of the most absurd and really dramatic lacking on the part of the legacy media, as they call it, New York Times, Washington Post, and so forth, is they've been afraid to point out that Donald Trump has serious personality disorders. Now, these personality disorders are not connected to his dementia, which people are now commenting about. But the thing about the personality disorders is people say, and the psychiatric profession says, that you can't diagnose it, can't mention it, I guess, unless you have that person as a client. I say bullshit to that. And maybe I could even debate some major psychiatrist, who knows? But the reason I said bullshit is this, that his behavior that fits right in with 4, can you see the 4? What are called cluster B personality disorders, is objective. We've seen it. It's behavior. We don't have to know what's inside his head. There's no blood tests. There's no physical test for it. It's all on file. It's all just out there in the open for us to see every single day. And we've seen him now since 2016 doing the same stuff. Hasn't changed at all. Now, one of the other things they say is that unless you're a psychiatrist or maybe a psychologist, you really don't have the capacity to diagnose these things. And again, I say bullshit. And why is that? Okay, this book called the DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Psychiatric Disorders, it's a big book. I don't expect you to read it right now. It comes out every 10 years usually. And it's all psychiatrists, basically, who find consensus on their definition of various mental health disorders. So, of course, personality disorders are in there. But the point is that we as social workers, who are the majority of psychotherapists, by the way, we're trained as social workers, and we end up becoming the majority of psychotherapists. So we're on the first line. We're on the first line. We are instructed to give a diagnosis, or numbers of diagnoses, after the first session with a new client. The first session, which is called an intake session. The insurance companies demand it in order to reimburse. But I've gotten to a point, or for a long time, where it's pretty easy to diagnose the major ones. Now, personality disorders are not that common, so we don't see them that often. And sometimes the one called borderline personality disorder can look like bipolar, or what they used to call manic depressive disorder, which is not a personality disorder. The tricky thing about personality disorders is there's, as far as I know, no medication available or existing to treat it. And most therapists of any kind are at a loss to treat it because the client, the patient, often becomes antagonistic and rejects therapy and will quit suddenly, okay? But if you have a clear personality disorder client and you're able to make a connection with them, you can see some very fundamental personality traits, all of which Donald Trump shares, all of them, all 4 of what is called cluster B personality disorders. So these are disorders that are kind of buried, intrinsic, they're inside of the person, okay? They're not something that's just symptomatic that can be solved with cognitive behavioral therapy or medication. These are like really intrinsic to the person, okay? I think it's very hard, as far as I know, to transform a person with one of these disorders to having not, to more normal, I know anxiety, depression, even bipolar would be less less complicated, less disturbing. Because what's really disturbing is that when a person with borderline personality or any of the other cluster B personality disorders, if they're challenged, they're usually going to quit or they're going to react. Quit, react, quit, react. And they're not going to give a hint, or they're not going to give notice that they're going to quit. They're just going to do it. So I'm going to read to you the cluster B personality disorders, and I'm going to define them a little bit, and then we're going to take it and analogize it to Trump's ongoing, very, very, very outward, very public, very transparent. God, he is so transparent in his personality disorders. I don't think you'd even have to have an MSW to do it, you know? I'm sure people are talking about it in general, and I think it's wrong for the psychiatric profession to claim ownership on talking about this, because these things are really important, and these things disqualify Trump, among many other things, from serving in a role like that. I mean, it makes the Biden issue with some form of dementia or whatever that he was showing in the last part of his campaign before he dropped out, it makes that look like nothing. This stuff is really, really connected. It's really, really buried in there. Or it's really observant. You can observe it. And I want people to know how dangerous these things are. And maybe you know already. But I want to go up against the psychiatric establishment and say bullshit. We can diagnose these kind of personality disorders when they're on display. They've been on display since 2016 and before. People who knew him in New York, they were calling him the Donald. What does that mean? The Donald, okay? So I'm going to define all these, but before I do, I want to take a hit. I want to take a really strong hit at somebody who I heard on the radio yesterday in Boston on a public radio station, an NPR station, a show called The Jim and Marjorie Show, which is on for 3 hours every day from about 11 to 2. And they have a lot of guests on. They make a lot of comments. And a lot of it is political, not always. But Jill Abramson, a former editor managing editor, I think, of the New York Times, had the audacity and ignorance when talking about Trump and talking about what might be his psychiatric disorders, mentioned ADHD. ADHD is as different from that as, I don't know, the sun and the moon. I've got ADHD. Almost all my clients have ADHD. I specialize in working with ADHD. I've diagnosed thousands of people of all ages who had therapy for years, had never been told, even somebody who was 83 and had never been told. And yet the ADHD was so clear. ADHD has nothing to do with any of those disorders. And that's a real hit. That's a real unfair attack or ignorant attack on ADHD. ADHD is functional. It's called neurodivergent. It's functional, okay? Personality cluster B, personality disorders are not functional because, okay, somebody becomes president or somebody like Elon Musk becomes semi-president and they have those disorders. But those disorders are not a person capable of really existing in a social being, a social life, without being so outrageously out there. And ADHD isn't like that at all. And people with ADHD are some of the smartest, most creative, inventive people that we know of. They're very high functioning. So that was a real hit. And unfortunately, the two hosts, Jim and Marjorie, didn't challenge her. ADHD sometimes might look a little like bipolar if it's extreme, but it's not. And ADHD can be treated with cognitive behavioral therapy, can be modulated, moderated, and there's lots of medication for it. So do not confuse by any means ADHD with personality disorders. Part 2, we're going to define and explain the personality disorders. So the 4 that are considered in cluster B are called cluster B because there's a cluster A and there's a cluster C, but his fall clearly into cluster B. And that's the most common ones. Okay, so we've got borderline personality disorder, which a lot of people have heard about. And bipolar can often be confused with that. It's hard to diagnose borderline personality disorder. Next one, narcissistic personality disorder. Is there anybody who hasn't observed the outrageous narcissism of Donald Trump? We'll talk about it in a minute. A third one is antisocial personality disorder. It does not mean somebody who won't hang out with people in public. It does not mean you're against social intercourse, social, settings. Doesn't mean that at all. I'll explain it. And the last one is called histrionic personality disorder. Oh my God, very, very, very evident. Okay, so borderline personality disorder, I'm going to read for a second from our friend at ChatGPT, and then we're going to talk about examples where he's shown this. And he's shown it a lot, okay? And I feel sorry for you if you haven't recognized it. But you will now after we talk about this. Okay, so borderline personality disorder is a pattern of intense emotional reactivity and inability in relationship, instability in relationships, self-image, and behavior, often driven by fear of abandonment. Common features, rapid mood shifts, we've seen that. All or nothing relationship swings. Oh my God. Chronic emptiness, intense anger. All of that borderline personality disorder. It's entrenched. It's entrenched. And impulsivity, spending, sex, substances, and self-harm, suicidality can occur. Okay, we're not seeing that. The big theme is high sensitivity plus difficulty regulating emotions under relational stress. We've seen that a lot. We're going to circle back on those. Next one, histrionic personality disorder. Again, very entrenched. A pattern of excessive emotionality and attention seeking. Yet Donald has to do everything to be the headline in the news every single day. It doesn't matter, it's deranged, often it is, but he gets in the paper headline every single day. That's attention seeking. With a strong need to be noticed and approved of. Hello. That's why they used to call him the Donald. Common features. Feeling uncomfortable when not the center of attention. Dramatic expression. Impressionistic speech. Exactly. His speech is things like, well, I met Putin, he's a really nice guy, I could tell, blah, blah, blah. These are not facts. These are not really observations. They're just impressions. Which is fine if we're not talking, it's fine if you're an artist, but it's not fine as a president making major worldwide decisions, okay? May use appearance to charm or gain attention. Hello. Even though he doesn't look very good. Relationships can feel intense or closer than they are. So he misreads people. Yeah, when he made it sound like him and Trump were really good buddies, okay, and many others, did they feel likewise? Was that reciprocity? Was that a reciprocal feeling? I doubt it. Narcissistic personality disorder. We love that one. We love that one. A pattern of grandiosity and need for admiration with reduced empathy. Let me say that again. Reduced empathy. Donald Trump, I think, should be in the Guinness Book of Records, or maybe he could win a Nobel Prize for having the least empathy of almost any person in history. Any political leader, almost the worst lack of empathy. And when Joe Biden ran the first time in 2016, I knew that I had to vote for him, even above Bernie Sanders, who I loved, because Joe Biden has a lot of empathy from his own life experience. And we had such a deficit. We had a we had a nationwide deficit of empathy. And you could feel it. You could feel it. Donald Trump created a nationwide lack of empathy. Shortage of empathy. The first one on this is antisocial personality disorder. And I said that was not about being afraid to go out in social situations. Obviously, the Donald does that. Here's how it's defined. A long-time pattern of disregarding other people's rights. Disregarding other people's rights. And social rules. Common features: deceitfulness, impulsivity, total, irritability, aggression, repeated irresponsibility, and lack of remorse. So Donald figured out that the best way to negotiate in a win-lose type of negotiation, not a win-win, not ever a win-win, it has to be win-lose at the maximum. He figured out, rightfully, that never showing remorse, never admitting a mistake, never doing anything that everybody else does was a winning ticket, was a winning formula. If you don't express remorse, you're not admitting any guilt, and therefore what? Therefore it's hard to get at you. Okay, often includes a history of conduct problems earlier in life, rule breaking, aggression, and so on. Well, he's done rule breaking about banking, about loans, about real estate, about, he's been sued 1 million times because he breaks all the rules. He breaks all the rules of a legitimate businessman. A legitimate businessman. Not the same as being mean or criminal, but those can overlap. All right, so on the first one, antisocial personality disorder, we know the lack of empathy extends all the way. What he's doing to immigrants right now through his henchmen in ICE and Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon and all those people, it shows a total lack of empathy. Even dividing families, even, going all out, having ICE go all out like the Gestapo. They are imitating the Gestapo. And Trump doesn't give a damn. Okay, borderline personality disorder, intense emotional reactivity, instability in relationships, self-image and behavior. I don't think he has any friends. Okay, when did he talk about, his daughter Ivanka? A lot in term number 1, Trump 1.0. He made it seem like he was in love with her. It was very weird. It was very, very weird. Let me just call it that. And he kind of used Ivanka as the intelligent child. She married a Jewish guy who was also lax remorse, Jared Kushner, and she was successful, and she was intelligent, unlike his two sons, who were considered dimwits. So he always celebrated her. Where is she now? Where is she now? We haven't heard anything about her in Trump 2.0. That's because relationships don't mean a damn. He's all about transactions. And my slogan in life is, therapy is a relationship, not a transaction. But we could also say, life are relationships. Life's meaning is about relationships and not about transactions. Donald Trump is the most transactional person we've ever seen in the presidency. It's all about the deal. The Art of the Deal was that book. So, and the all or nothing, okay. So at one point, Ivanka was all, and now I guess she's nothing. And he's done that with so many people. It's always, like he's done that with Putin. I met Putin, I looked in his eyes, I know he's an honest man, okay. That's really great research, okay. All right, and then high sensitivity and difficulty regulating emotions under relational stress. Well, he's under stress all the time. We don't know how he experiences it in his inner life. I wonder if he has an inner life. Some people are so transactional that the word inner life doesn't mean a damn thing. But let's say he has an inner life and it's stressed out because he's got a lot on his plate. He knows that his percentage of people who like what he's doing, has gone way down, okay? So the compatibility, the liking him, the favorability, that's the word. His favorability ratings have gone way down. In fact, very quickly. And part of it is ice. Okay. So we've got that really in a very, very strong way. And now I'm about to read the Histrionic. So we had the all or nothing on the borderline, okay? Histrionic, personality disorder, a pattern of excessive emotionality and attention seeking. Okay, the Kennedy Center. Okay, destroying the Rose Garden. Okay, having a kind of Great Gatsby ball in the new ballroom when the whole issue of food stamps or SNAP benefits was still up in the air. So millions of poor people were not sure if they were going to be able to eat, while Donald and his lavish friends are dancing in the Great Gatsby ballroom. In the ballroom. Okay, histrionic. Okay, he wants his name on the Kennedy Center. He wants the Nobel Prize. Okay, fortunately the Nobel organization said, no, you can't get a prize by trading it. You can't get a traded prize by Machado, the woman who won it from Venezuela. You can't get a prize from her and claim that you won the Nobel Prize. So some things are pure. Donald Trump has no sense of integrity or purity. Some things are actually taken seriously. Not like the Donald Trump Bible that he put out a year ago, 2 years ago. Nobody would, I don't know if anybody would buy the Donald Trump Bible and think that it had integrity. Okay. So there's no integrity because it's all histrionic. It's all for show. And then narcissistic personality disorder. When is he going to put his face on the dollar bill? When is he going to put his face on every single public, federal government building in Washington? When is he going to put his face on Air Force planes, bombers? When's he going to put his face on bombs? You know, he would love to have his face show up bombing a village in Venezuela or Iraq or Afghanistan or Vietnam, anywhere. Has no conscience, no remorse. So the narcissistic thing means that he has to be the center of attention. He has to be self-praising, because he can't rely on praise from others. It's not praise, it's ass-kissing. It's ass-kissing. In fact, so many of his members of his cabinet hated him before they got appointed. Like Marco, as he calls him, Little Marco, called him a, what was it? A danger or something to the presidency. And now he's Secretary of State. Okay, that's happened a lot with Trump. Because as long as he can turn somebody into a worshiper, he doesn't care what they really think. Doesn't have a clue. No, he has a clue, but he doesn't give a damn, okay? So I'd say the narcissistic one is the one that we see most dramatically. And if people think that it's okay to have a president who has borderline, narcissistic, histrionic, and antisocial personality disorders, why don't you just elect a Don of the Mafia? Why don't you just bring back Al Capone and elect him? Why don't you just elect Pretty Boy Floyd? Why don't you just elect, who was the guy that raped all those women? I can't think of the name. You know, and Donald Trump, of course, on his narcissism, has used it to the detriment of many women, And he also said, what's more narcissistic, that said, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and I wouldn't get arrested, or something like that. Or he could say, I like pussy. I like to grab women and get away with it. And how do people who call themselves Christians, okay, how do they accept this with a straight face? How did they find a minister who would agree with that? I don't know how. I don't know how so many people have an inability to do critical thinking. The level of our education and knowledge and wisdom and critical thinking and analysis has unfortunately gone down quite a bit from when I was, you know, in my 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever. It's gone down. Partly the education system and partly our friends at Fox News. But that's another story. I want to just say that if you're out there and you're not really extreme pro-ICE or pro-MAGA, and let's say somehow you're on the fence, I don't know, maybe you've been in a cave all this time, somehow you haven't followed the news at all, and you're not sure, you're still not sure after all this, I say, listen to what I just said. If somebody has 4 major personality disorders, how can they possibly be making wise or legitimate or rational or non-insane decisions? They cannot. Thank you.